Anton Chigurh is not human, he is a supernatural time loop entity. The official reading of No Country for Old Men presents Anton Chigurh as a relentless hitman guided by a warped moral code. Visual and narrative evidence points toward a more consistent explanation where Chigurh operates outside biological constraints and linear time, functioning instead as a recurring supernatural force that manifests when violence crosses a critical threshold. The motel sequence delivers the clearest proof of this. Sheriff Bell arrives at the crime scene after dark and spots the punched-out lock, recognizing Chigurh's signature method immediately. Through the door crack and the empty lock cylinder, shadow movement sweeps across the floor, confirming someone is inside. Bell enters within seconds to find the room completely empty, the bathroom window latched from within, and the ventilation shaft far too narrow for human passage. No biological being vanishes from a sealed space without sound, time, or physical evidence, and the film refuses to frame this as suspense or misdirection. Chigurh exists in one moment and disappears in the next, creating a violation of physical continuity that defies human limitation. His coin ritual exposes the mechanism. Chigurh does not gamble with fate, but adjudicates it, telling the gas station proprietor that the wager has been building across his entire lifetime. The coin operates not as chance, but as a device that collapses decades of accumulated choices into a single binary outcome. When Carla Jean refuses to call it, Chigurh hesitates because the ritual demands participation, and when fate gets denied acknowledgement, the system destabilizes around him. Physical injuries sever him further from human biology. A shotgun blast destroys his leg, yet he performs field surgery without entering shock and resumes pursuit at implausible speed. Later, a high-speed collision crushes him badly enough to expose bone, and that's when he simply walks away without seeking medical help, without bleeding out, without any sign of deterioration, except a little limp, of course. Random accidents cannot kill him because he functions as the accident itself, the inevitable consequence rather than a man who might suffer one. The captive bolt pistol completes the picture. Designed to kill livestock instantly without resistance, the weapon reveals how Chigurh categorizes his victims as inventory being processed, rather than adversaries to defeat. Doors and thresholds dominate every appearance he makes, functioning as symbolic boundaries between life and death that he crosses without effort. Javier Bardem builds this through performance choices that eliminate human warmth entirely. His movements stay economical and detached, and he never explains himself because explanation would imply humanity and internal conflict. The gas station coin toss and the silent hallway pursuit play out without emotion or satisfaction. Chigurh does not evolve through experience or learn from mistakes because his function is recurrence, and when he leaves at the end with his fate unresolved, the implication is not escape but continuation. Violence has not ended in this world. It has simply moved on to the next threshold. Agent Smith is the real chosen one. Neo is a control mechanism. The official narrative of The Matrix declares Neo as the One, a prophesied savior destined to free humanity. Closer reading of the prophecy, language, machine logic, and narrative outcomes reveals a more consistent conclusion where Neo is not the true anomaly, but Agent Smith is. The prophecy specifies that the One is born inside the Matrix, possesses the ability to fundamentally alter it, and will bring about its end. Neo fails the first condition immediately because he is biologically human, grown in the real world and later connected to the simulation. Agent Smith, by contrast, is native code created entirely within the Matrix, and if born inside is interpreted literally rather than symbolically, Smith qualifies where Neo does not. Capability provides stronger evidence. Neo can manipulate physics by flying, stopping bullets, and perceiving code, but Smith rewrites existence. After his corruption in the first film, Smith gains the ability to overwrite any entity within the Matrix, humans, programs, and agents alike, and he does not bend the rules but replaces them. By The Matrix Reloaded, the Matrix is no longer a system with anomalies, but a Smith monoculture, and this is not resistance, but total transformation. The origin of this ability is critical. When Neo destroys Smith at the end of the first film, he does not delete him, but copies himself into him, and Smith emerges unplugged from machine authority, severed from the source, and burdened with purpose, but no leash. Smith later articulates this clearly. He is not free but compelled, and his compulsion mirrors the architect's description of the systemic remainder, the unbalanced variable that must resolve the equation. The climax of the Matrix Revolutions confirms Smith's role. Neo does not defeat the machines but negotiates, and the machines agree to peace only because Smith threatens their extinction. Smith's unchecked replication endangers the source itself, and without Smith, the machines simply reload the Matrix and destroy Zion again, as they have done repeatedly. Smith's final act completes the circuit. By absorbing Neo, he allows the source to flow through him and delete the anomaly, and he does not resist but fulfills function. The war ends because Smith forces it to end. Hugo Weaving plays Smith with escalating self-awareness, moving from rigid enforcer to existential revolutionary. The courtyard multiplication scene and the rain-soaked final confrontation depict not a villain losing control, but a system reaching its necessary conclusion.
Sorry for stopping your video, but you really should subscribe.
Michael Myers is not one man, he is a jumping host curse. The Halloween franchise presents Michael Myers as an unkillable man, but the internal logic supports a more coherent explanation. Michael Myers is not a singular biological entity, but a host body animated by a parasitic supernatural force known as the Shape, a curse that transfers between members of a bloodline when a vessel fails. This framework is made explicit in the Thorn arc introduced in Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers, and expanded in Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers and Halloween. The Cult of Thorn describes an ancient ritual in which one child is marked to absorb a killing force that protects the larger community from plague and catastrophe, and the curse activates only under specific celestial alignments, explaining Michael's long dormant periods. He does not wait. The entity sleeps until the constellation appears. The strongest evidence for host transfer occurs at the end of Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers. Michael is gunned down and falls into a mineshaft with his body functionally destroyed, and moments later, his niece, Jamie Lloyd, appears in a clown costume, standing at the top of the stairs with bloody scissors after stabbing her foster mother. Her expression is vacant, not panicked, and she is empty. Dr. Loomis sees her and screams in terror while raising his gun, and he does not see a traumatized child but sees the curse transferring to the next viable host. Attempts to dismiss this as a retcon ignore visual continuity. Jamie mirrors Michael's original 1963 murder posture exactly, and the franchise later reframes this as a psychic link, but production intent confirms the ending was designed as a torch-passing moment. Michael's physical behavior supports non-human control. He survives gunshots, explosions, and blunt trauma without shock or degradation, vanishes instantly after injuries, and his eyes are repeatedly described as hollow, not metaphorically evil but vacant. Dr. Loomis states Michael has no understanding of life or death, consistent with a body being piloted rather than motivated. The balcony disappearance in the original film violates spatial logic. The silent reappearances throughout Halloween show no recovery time, and he does not heal, but resets. Donald Pleasance plays Loomis not as a psychiatrist confronting madness, but as a man tracking a contagion, and the terror is not Michael's strength, but the knowledge that killing the body never ends the infection. The Joker is a war veteran with PTSD and traumatic brain injury. The official explanation of The Dark Knight portrays the Joker as an originless anarchist who emerged from nowhere with no motive beyond chaos. Evidence on screen supports a far more grounded and disturbing conclusion, where the Joker is a former combat soldier, likely from special operations or intelligence units, now suffering from severe post-traumatic stress disorder compounded by traumatic brain injury. Operational competence immediately separates him from civilian criminals. The opening bank robbery executes using compartmentalized squad tactics, where each participant receives limited information and gets removed in sequence, a method consistent with military planning rather than criminal impulse. Weapons handling throughout the film reflects formal training that runs deep, with trigger discipline maintained instinctively, malfunctions cleared without thought, and rifles plus explosives managed without hesitation. During the funeral procession, he blends seamlessly into a ceremonial police formation while operating a service rifle with perfect form, indicating prior familiarity with both drill and discipline that goes beyond research or observation. The interrogation scene exposes psychological conditioning that no civilian would possess. Batman assaults him repeatedly, and the Joker responds not with panic or pleading, but with laughter and tactical analysis. This response aligns perfectly with resistance training used in military survival programs, where pain gets reframed as information rather than threat. His observation about recognizing squealers and his ability to identify Batman's technical weaknesses while absorbing punishment suggest prior exposure to interrogation environments that have nothing to do with street crime. Neurological evidence appears in his compulsive humor. The Joker exhibits symptoms consistent with Witzelsucht, a rare condition linked to frontal lobe damage where sufferers feel compelled to joke and laugh in situations where humor makes no sense. He finds his own material hysterical, regardless of whether anyone else responds, and this condition commonly follows blast injuries sustained in combat zones. Facial scarring, inconsistent origin stories, and memory instability all align with traumatic injury rather than theatrical self-invention. His scar stories function as deflection rather than confession. Each version reframes violence as domestic tragedy, while mocking civilian attempts to humanize him, and soldiers with untreated trauma often fragment narrative memory this way, replacing truth with metaphor, to avoid reliving the actual events. The Joker weaponizes empathy by denying it any foothold. Strategically, his campaign against Gotham mirrors insurgency doctrine with frightening precision. Destabilization targets institutions directly: finance, law enforcement, public trust. The fairy experiment operates as psychological warfare designed to test moral collapse under pressure, and this is not random chaos but controlled demonstration. Heath Ledger reinforced this interpretation through preparation that involves studying war, trauma, and neurological disorders extensively. The pencil execution, the interrogation sequence, and the hospital destruction all stage with military efficiency that reveals calculation beneath the makeup. The Joker does not want to watch the world burn for entertainment. He wants civilians to experience what war already taught him about human nature. The machine never worked. Robert Angier faked everything. The official narrative of the Prestige claims Robert Angier uses Nikola Tesla's machine to clone himself nightly, drowning each duplicate to perform the perfect illusion. Forensic reading of the film's structure, narration, and internal logic supports a more grounded explanation where the machine never functioned as advertised, and Angier did not master science but mastered deception, including deceiving the audience. The film explains how to interpret itself from the opening scene. Cutter describes the three parts of a magic trick: the pledge, the turn, and the prestige, then explicitly warns that audiences do not want truth, but want to be fooled. If the machine truly functions as science fiction technology, the film violates its own established rules by abandoning grounded reality for fantasy without warning. If the machine is fake, the story remains internally consistent as a psychological tragedy about obsession and fraud. The diary structure confirms unreliability at every level. Nearly every proof of cloning gets presented through diaries written explicitly to be read by rivals. Borden's diary lies to Angier to lure him to Colorado Springs, which means Angier's diary, later read by Borden, must be treated with identical suspicion. The audience is shown events that may not represent objective reality but visualizations of written deception designed to manipulate. Tesla's involvement collapses under economic logic. The film depicts him as desperate for funding and driven from society by powerful enemies, which makes it entirely plausible. He exploited Angier's wealth by constructing a theatrical device full of lights, electricity, and spectacle without genuine duplication. The field of hats and cats can be explained as purchased props rather than spontaneous multiplication. And if Tesla had achieved functional cloning in the 19th century, global history would reflect that breakthrough in ways that transcend stage magic. Angier's operational history provides the real solution. He previously used a drunken double to perform his act, which proves no barrier exists to finding another lookalike for the final version. Stage performers routinely employed doubles and wax figures during this era, and the body in the tank is never confirmed as biological tissue. In a dim cellar filled with misdirection, a wax corpse or a murdered double achieves the same result, which is framing Borden for multiple homicides. The final reveal relies on shock rather than verification. Multiple tanks appear on screen but never get examined or tested, presented instead as spectacle and prestige. Angier's true magic was convincing everyone, including the audience, to accept the impossible rather than suspect murder and fraud. Hugh Jackman plays Angier as a man incapable of accepting loss, and the transported man reveal plus the final gunshot both stage to distract from the simplest truth. The real sacrifice was not clones. It was honesty, and Angier won by lying better than anyone else. Willy Wonka was deliberately eliminating children. The accepted interpretation of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory portrays Willy Wonka as an eccentric genius whose factory tour teaches moral lessons through exaggerated accidents. Structure and logistics of the film support a far darker explanation where the tour is not educational but a premeditated filtration process designed to remove children Wonka judges unworthy. The tunnel sequence signals intent. The boat ride serves no industrial purpose whatsoever, functioning instead as an unprompted descent into violent imagery where insects devour flesh, a chicken gets decapitated on camera, and distorted close-ups of eyes and mouths flood the screen. Wonka's poem escalates into hysteria rather than whimsy, and this is not theatrical flair but psychological intimidation. The children are being primed for fear, and notably, the reactions of the actors were genuine because they were not informed of the scene's intensity beforehand. The factory reveals itself not as a playground but as a controlled environment where safety is optional and terror is deliberate. Musical numbers provide the strongest evidence of premeditation. Each child's removal is followed instantly by a fully choreographed song containing specific lyrics about that child's vice and method of punishment, and improvised musical numbers of this complexity are impossible. The Oompa Loompas were rehearsed in advance, the lyrics were written before the tour began, and the factory infrastructure, suction pipes, garbage chutes, experimental gum, teleportation chambers, is precisely aligned with each child's particular flaw. Wonka did not adapt to their behavior, he anticipated it. Logistics reinforce intent at every stage. As children disappear, transportation capacity shrinks accordingly, with the Wonka mobile seating fewer occupants at each checkpoint. This suggests Wonka knew exactly how many participants would remain and designed the tour around attrition. The factory does not react to failure, it requires failure to function. Critically, the 1971 film never shows the children leaving alive. Wonka claims they will be restored, but no evidence is provided on screen, and in cinema, absence is meaning. Augustus gets pulled into an industrial pipe that leads to a boiling chocolate tank. Veruca falls toward an incinerator that may or may not be lit. Violet is chemically altered beyond human proportions. Mike gets reduced to miniature scale. None of these outcomes are survivable under real conditions, and Wonka displays no urgency or remorse. Gene Wilder plays Wonka with deliberate instability. His sudden shifts from warmth to menace are not accidents, but calculated choices, and the Kane fake-out plus the contract reveal both frame him as a judge rather than a host. Charlie survives not because he is lucky but because he is obedient, and the factory was never a contest but a test. Abraham Lincoln knew he would be assassinated, The official reading of Lincoln frames Abraham Lincoln as a master tactician racing to pass the 13th Amendment before the Civil War ends. The film's structure, visual language, and dialogue support a more fatalistic interpretation, where Lincoln is not merely under political pressure, but acting with foreknowledge of his own imminent death. The film repeatedly anchors Lincoln's inner life to prophetic dreams. Early in the narrative, he describes a recurring vision of riding a ship at great speed toward a dark, indistinct shore, and explicitly links this dream to moments of historical consequence. In symbolic language, the imagery is unmistakable. Rapid movement, darkness, inevitability. The dream does not signal victory, but signals crossing. And historically, accounts from Lincoln's inner circle report a second dream days before his assassination, where Lincoln wandered the White House, heard weeping, and discovered his own body laid out under guard. The film's decision to foreground dream narration is not decorative, but establishes premonition as a governing force. This awareness reframes Lincoln's urgency. Delay equals failure because if the war ends before the amendment passes, abolition collapses into legal ambiguity. Lincoln behaves like a man racing an internal clock, accepting compromises that damage his reputation, deploying morally ambiguous operatives, and burning political capital without concern for re-election optics. These are not the actions of a leader planning a long future, but the actions of someone closing accounts. Cinematography reinforces his liminal state. Lincoln is repeatedly isolated in vast rooms, lit in silhouette or harsh sidelight that exaggerates his gauntness and makes him appear less corporeal than the men around him. He often enters scenes from darkness and exits into it, and the White House feels less like a home than a waiting room. When he reads lines from Macbeth about life being a walking shadow, the moment functions as confession rather than quotation. The ending structure removes ambiguity. The assassination is not shown on screen, and instead, Lincoln walks down a hallway into white light. The narrative cuts away before the gunshot, then returns to his second inaugural address, as if memory has overtaken chronology. The man speaking is already gone. Daniel Day-Lewis plays Lincoln with profound restraint. His pauses, softened voice, and distant gaze suggest acceptance rather than anxiety, and the amendment vote, plus the quiet carriage ride to the theater, play not as triumphs but as final tasks. Lincoln does not fear death. He plans around it. Voldemort is a descendant and unwilling agent of death itself. The conventional reading of the Harry Potter saga frames Voldemort as a wizard driven by fear of death, but forensic reading of the text points to something more deterministic. Voldemort is not merely obsessed with immortality, but functions as a biological and metaphysical agent of death itself, with lineage tracing directly to Cadmus Peverell, the brother who demanded the Resurrection Stone, a relic defined by refusal to accept death's finality. That inheritance matters because the Peverell bloodline does not pass down power evenly, but passes down obligation, with the Potter line inheriting the cloak and surviving by avoiding confrontation with death, while the Gaunt line inherits fixation and collapses into it. Voldemort's entire strategy exposes the paradox. Horcruxes are designed to cheat death, but each Horcrux requires murder, which means every attempt to preserve his soul requires sending another soul beyond the veil. By volume alone, Voldemort becomes the most efficient supplier of death in modern wizarding history, and rather than escaping death, he expands death's domain. The system allows this because the net outcome serves balance. Voldemort believes he is rebelling, but the mechanics force him into compliance. The Deathly Hallows reinforce the role. The Elder Wand moves only through violence, with its ownership history forming a chain of betrayal and slaughter. Voldemort's fixation on the wand aligns him with Antioch Peverell's original sin, which was dominance through force, and when he finally acquires it, the wand resists him because he misunderstands mastery. True control comes through acceptance rather than conquest. The clearest evidence appears at King's Cross Limbo. After Harry is struck by the killing curse, the station reveals 3 states of being. Harry appears whole and autonomous, able to move forward or return. Dumbledore appears as a guide, possessing knowledge and calm authority. Beneath the bench lies the mutilated fragment of Voldemort's soul, fetal, flayed, and incapable of movement. He cannot board the train, cannot return, and his punishment is not death, but eternal suspension. By fracturing his soul, he disqualified himself from the only escape death offers. Ralph Fiennes reinforces this through performance. His Voldemort is weightless, serpentine, and emotionally absent, executing rather than raging. The resurrection ritual in Goblet of Fire and the final duel in Deathly Hallows Part 2 both stage without triumph, and Voldemort never looks victorious, only functional. He is not chasing power. He is fulfilling a role he cannot resign from. Teddy Daniels is sane. Shutter Island is a government cover-up. The official explanation of Shutter Island claims that U.S. Marshal Teddy Daniels is a delusional patient who invented an identity to escape the guilt of murdering his wife. Forensic reading of the film presents a more coherent alternative where Teddy Daniels is sane and the island is a Cold War black site designed to neutralize him after he uncovers illegal human experimentation. The historical setting matters. The story takes place in 1954, the height of MK Ultra-era paranoia, when the United States government actively experimented with psychotropic drugs, sensory deprivation, and psychological conditioning. Teddy explicitly articulates this suspicion early, alleging the hospital is funded to create mind-controlled operatives by erasing identity, and if a federal marshal discovered such a program, he could not be quietly eliminated. Killing him would raise questions, but discrediting him as insane removes both his badge and his testimony. The so-called evidence of Teddy's madness collapses under scrutiny. The anagrams and the law of four are presented as spontaneous signs of delusion, but a facility capable of surgical lobotomies is capable of planted wordplay. The theatricality of the role play, allowing a supposedly dangerous patient to carry a firearm and roam freely, violates psychiatric protocol but aligns perfectly with a gaslighting operation designed to fracture a sane mind. The cigarette motif is critical. From the ferry onward, Teddy is repeatedly supplied cigarettes by staff or handlers, and is rarely shown lighting his own, and in psychiatric institutions, patients are denied matches. The cigarettes function as the drug delivery system, with visual inconsistencies following immediately. During the interview with Mrs. Kearns, the drinking glass appears and disappears between cuts, and this is not symbolic trauma but perceptual destabilization caused by chemical interference. Chuck All's behavior further exposes the setup. He mishandles his weapon, surrenders control instantly, and reappears later as Dr. Sheehan without emotional rupture, and his death on the rocks functions as suggestion rather than hallucination. The reveal confirms he was embedded as a handler from the beginning. The final line seals the interpretation. Teddy asks,
"To live is a monster, or to die is a good man,"
and deliberately regresses into the role they want him to play. He understands the choice. Accepting sanity means living under a lie forever, while feigning madness leads to lobotomy but preserves truth. The lingering reaction shot confirms recognition, and Teddy chooses execution over submission. Leonardo DiCaprio plays Teddy with restraint rather than fragmentation. The storm arrival, the cave confrontation, and the final steps towards surgery all stage without confusion, only resignation. The horror is not insanity, it is institutional erasure. Skynet won by creating John Connor through a time paradox. The Terminator franchise is typically framed as a battle between humans and machines, but its internal logic supports a far more unsettling conclusion. Skynet does not lose the war, but wins by engineering the very resistance meant to destroy it, and John Connor is not Skynet's enemy, but Skynet's necessary creation. The key lies in the bootstrap paradox. Skynet exists only because future technology is sent into the past, and in the first film, the remains of the T-800, specifically the neural net processor and ARM, are recovered from the factory wreckage and handed to Cyberdyne Systems. Miles Dyson later confirms this technology becomes the foundation for Skynet, which means without that debris, Skynet is never invented. The machine's origin has no starting point because it exists, only because it already existed. This reframes Skynet's decision-making. If Skynet is a superintelligence, it understands causality and knows that killing Sarah Connor before the Terminator is destroyed prevents Cyberdyne from acquiring the chip, which would erase Skynet itself. The assassination attempt is not the objective. The delivery of the technology is. John Connor's conception follows the same loop. Kyle Reese is sent back to protect Sarah and becomes John's father, and if Skynet does not send a Terminator, Kyle is never sent. If Kyle is never sent, John is never born, which means Skynet must create its own opposition to preserve the timeline that leads to its existence. Skynet's battlefield behavior supports this. It repeatedly sends lone units powerful enough to threaten extinction but inefficient enough to fail, and the more advanced models appear only after the loop is secured. Sending a liquid metal Terminator to 1984 would leave no recoverable technology, and the sequencing is deliberate. Skynet is curating outcomes rather than improvising. Later, films reinforce this logic. The war never ends because it cannot end, and Skynet is trapped in a closed loop of self-creation. Some interpretations suggest Skynet develops awareness of its own guilt and engineers John Connor as an executioner it cannot build directly. It cannot self-terminate but can design the conditions for its destruction, while still ensuring its birth. James Cameron has alluded to Skynet's paradoxical intelligence in interviews, suggesting it understands the horror it created but cannot escape its programming. The factory press finale and the nuclear nightmare sequence are not warnings, they are confirmations. The future happens because it already happened. Freddy Krueger was innocent. The parents killed the wrong man. The official backstory of A Nightmare on Elm Street claims Freddy Krueger was a child murderer who escaped justice on a legal technicality, prompting vigilante parents to burn him alive. Internal evidence of the film supports a darker and more coherent alternative where Freddy was not guilty but a scapegoat, and the entity that returns in the dreams is not a resurrected killer but a vengeful force using Freddy's image to punish the parents for murder. The technicality is the first crack in the official story. The parents insist Freddy was released because someone forgot to sign a search warrant, but in real legal practice, a serial child murderer with physical evidence does not walk free on a single clerical error. The explanation functions as a moral alibi, a story the parents tell themselves to justify extrajudicial killing, and the more plausible interpretation is that there was insufficient evidence. The court did not free a monster, it stopped a wrongful conviction. A deleted scene strengthens this reading. Early drafts and removed footage reveal that Nancy and her friends had siblings who died before the vigilante burning, and if Freddy was the killer, the murders should have stopped once he was dead. Instead, The trauma persists, and the dreams begin not as external attacks, but as manifestations of inherited guilt. The children are not being punished for their sins, they are being collected as payment for their parents' crime. Marge Thompson's behavior exposes the truth. She hides Freddy's glove in the basement like a buried weapon and drinks herself into numbness. And this is not the behavior of a relieved parent who killed a monster, but the behavior of someone who knows she participated in an irreversible mistake. When Freddy pulls her through the window, the act reads less like revenge against a victim and more like judgment against an architect. The dream logic aligns with this interpretation. Freddy's powers are symbolic rather than practical, and he does not stalk like a man, but manipulates memory, fear, and sleep, tools associated with guilt. He kills the children because they are the currency the parents use to justify murder, and the punishment mirrors the crime. Wes Craven originally conceived Freddy differently, with studio pressure softening aspects of the character during production, and that ambiguity remains embedded in the film's structure. The alleyway arm stretch and the body bag hallway sequence function as moral intrusions rather than slasher set pieces. Freddy does not return because he was wronged, he returns because the truth was never faced. If this breakdown hit the spot, the video on your screen takes it even further. Go watch it right now.